The sound of tearing fabric was sharp, cruel, and final. Gasps erupted from the onlookers lining Market Street as Sophia's long, flowing summer dress split down the side, exposing her legs and leaving her clutching the shredded cloth in shock. The bullies laughed loud, coarse, and unapologetic, feeding on her humiliation like it was a spectacle meant for them. Phones came out, camera shutters clicked, and in that blistering August sunlight, Sophia felt the heat of shame rise into her cheeks, the sting burning deeper than the summer air ever could. But beneath that flush of humiliation, something colder and sharper began to take root, an unspoken vow. They wouldn't get away with this. Sofia Ramirez is 26, had spent months preparing for this day. Her art exhibit was the culmination of years of work, sunrises, sketched in pastel cityscapes, brought to life with oil portraits of strangers turned intimate through her brush. She had fought for this street permit, saved every penny to buy the booth space, and now, on what was supposed to be her proudest afternoon, she stood half exposed in front of strangers, while the very people she'd once known from the neighborhood reduced her to a punchline. The ringleader, a man in his early 30s named Kyle, was a familiar shadow from her past. In high school, he had been the kind of person who could sniff out insecurity like a predator. Back then, she'd been shy, quiet, easy prey. She thought moving away for college, building her own life, and coming back as a professional artist would be a victory. But the smirk on Kyle's face now told her that in his mind, nothing had changed. "Guess paintin' isn't paying much, huh?" he jeered, holding a scrap of her torn dress like it was a trophy. His two friends' men just as smug, just as small. Inside howled with laughter. Sophia tried to cover herself with the rest of the fabric, holding her chin high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The crowd didn't help. Some people averted their eyes, uncomfortable. Others whispered. A few had the decency to step forward, asking if she was okay. But Kyle shoved them away with a swaggering confidence that came from years of unchecked arrogance. Sophia could have run. She could have packed her things, fled the scene, and told herself it wasn't worth it. But the years she'd spent in a dimly lit dojo back in college told her otherwise. The muscle memory was still there, the stances, the grips, the way to use an opponent's momentum against them. She had walked away from martial arts after earning her brown belt, thinking she'd never need it outside the sparring mat. But now, standing barefoot on the hot pavement, heart pounding in her chest, she knew exactly what she would do. Not here. Not now. The bullies were too riled up, too surrounded by people who might get caught in the middle. But soon, when they felt safe enough to push her again, she'd be ready. As she tied a spare canvas drop cloth around her waist to cover herself, Kyle leaned close, his voice low and venomous. "Don't think you can hide, Soph. You know we're going to see you again." She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him the smallest, most deliberate smile. "I'm counting on it." Inside, her humiliation hardened into something immovable, a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release. And when it did, the same crowd that had witnessed her shame would see something else entirely. The night after the incident, Sophia sat at her kitchen table, the drop cloth she had wrapped around herself still in a crumpled heap by the door. Every time she looked at it, her chest tightened, not from embarrassment now, but from the sting of injustice. The laughter, the clicking of camera phones, the smugness in Kyle's face replayed in her mind on an endless loop. She opened her laptop, not to scroll social media. She already knew the videos might be circulating, but to search for something she hadn't thought about in years, her old martial arts instructor. She found his name within minutes, Master Han. He was still running the same small dojo downtown, a dimly lit space with scuffed mats and the faint smell of pine cleaner. She dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. The next morning, Sophia walked into that familiar space, and was met with Master Han's steady gaze. "It's been a long time," he said, bowing slightly. "Too long," she admitted, returning the bow. "But I need to sharpen my memory." He studied her for a moment. "This isn't just about training, is it?" "No," she said simply. For the next several hours, she moved through drills she'd once known by heart. Wrist escapes, pressure point, targeting, quick locks, and takedowns. Her muscles protested at first, but the rhythm came back quicker than she expected. Every snap of her strikes, every pivot of her hips brought back that steady confidence she had lost. By the end of the week, Sophia felt her body responding faster. She didn't need brute force. She knew Kyle's type: overconfident, careless, and convinced that size alone gave him the advantage. Against someone trained, that arrogance would be his downfall. She began to notice Kyle and his friends hanging around the Market Street area, again swaggering between food trucks and bars looking for trouble. Sometimes they'd glance her way, mutter something, and move on. She didn't bite. Not yet. She wanted them to think she was still shaken, still vulnerable. 2 days later, she got her opening. Sophia was setting up a smaller art display in the plaza when she heard his voice behind her, dripping with mockery. "Well, if it isn't the market's favorite little exhibitionist," Kyle sneered. His friends chuckled like trained hyenas. "No dress for us to tear today." Sophia turned slowly, keeping her expression calm, almost bored. "Guess you'll have to find another hobby." He stepped closer, invading her space, his hand lifting toward the strap of her top. "Maybe we can improvise." She didn't move away. "Go ahead," she said softly, her eyes locking onto his. Kyle grinned, mistaking her stillness for fear. His hand brushed the fabric, and that was all she needed. Her fingers snapped up, clamping around his wrist. In one fluid motion, she twisted, stepping into him and using her hip as a lever. The sudden torque forced his arm up behind his back, his shoulders jerking as a pained grunt escaped his lips. One friend took a half step forward, but froze when Sophia's gaze shot to him like a blade. The other backed away, muttering, "Holy hell." "Remember this moment," she said evenly into Kyle's ear, "because you started it. And I'm ending it." She pushed him forward until he stumbled to his knees. The surrounding plaza had gone silent. People watching with wide eyes, phones raised once again. But this time, they were capturing something very different from the first video. Kyle's knees hit the pavement with a dull thud, and a sharp hiss of pain slipped from between his clenched teeth. Sophia kept her grip steady, the leverage of the arm lock pinning him in a position that stripped away every ounce of swagger he'd carried minutes earlier. The plaza was still, only the occasional gasp or the faint rustle of clothing from the gathered crowd broke the quiet. "Get off me!" Kyle growled, trying to jerk free. The motion only tightened the hold, drawing another pained groan from his throat. Sophia's voice was low controlled, but it carried across the plaza. "You thought humiliation was entertainment. How's it feel when the audience changes sides?" A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. People who'd once looked away during her public shaming now leaned in their expressions, shifting from curiosity to quiet satisfaction. Some were smiling just slightly, as if justice had finally decided to show up. Kyle's friends hovered nearby, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. The taller one, Trent, puffed up his chest and took a step forward, but Sophia didn't flinch. She shifted her stance just enough to apply a fraction more pressure, forcing Kyle to hiss out a warning. "Don't, Trent. Just don't." Sophia remembered every sneer, every snide comment from high school, and the smug look on Kyle's face when he tore her dress days ago. The difference now was that she wasn't the quiet girl in the back row anymore. She had the strength, skill, and presence to hold her ground, and she wasn't about to let that moment slip away. She leaned in, speaking so only he could hear. "You're going to apologize, loud enough for everyone here to hear you, and you're going to mean it." Kyle tensed. "No way in hell." A subtle adjustment of her grip sent a bolt of pain through his shoulder. His hiss turned into a short, stifled yell, the sound echoing off the buildings around them. Okay, okay, he spat, his voice cracking under the strain. Sophia loosened the pressure just enough for him to breathe, but kept him firmly in place. Say it. He hesitated for a second too long, and she reminded him with the smallest upward jerk of his arm. His voice was rough, humiliated. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did. Not good enough, she said, her tone unyielding. Kyle swallowed hard, his voice louder this time. I'm sorry for tearing your dress and humiliating you. I was wrong. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A few people clapped. Someone let out a sharp whistle. The hum of quiet approval spread through the plaza, and for the first time, Kyle looked around and saw no allies, only witnesses to his downfall. Sophia released the hold with deliberate slowness, stepping back and allowing him to regain his feet. His shoulders were hunched, his right arm tucked protectively against his side. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind in awkward silence. Sophia didn't move until they disappeared around the corner. Then she faced the crowd, her voice steady but softer. No one deserves to be humiliated. Not here. Not anywhere. The applause came this time without hesitation. And unlike the first video of her being torn down, Sophia knew this one, if it went viral, would tell a very different story. For the rest of the afternoon, Sophia stayed in the plaza, selling her art and talking to visitors as if nothing had happened. But she could still feel the electric hum in the air, a mix of shock, admiration, and the undeniable thrill of witnessing a reversal of power. Every so often, she caught people whispering to each other, stealing glances her way. A few even approached to quietly say, "Good for you," before slipping off into the crowd. She knew word would spread fast. In a small city like this, stories traveled through coffee shops and bar counters quicker than any official news. By nightfall, Sophia's phone was buzzing with notifications, friends tagging her in posts, strangers sharing clips of the arm lock from a dozen different angles. The same plaza where she had been humiliated days ago was now the backdrop of her standing over Kyle, calm and controlled, while he begged for mercy. But with the attention came the possibility of retaliation. She knew Kyle. His pride had always been bigger than his common sense. That night, Sophia double-checked her locks and kept her phone within reach. She wasn't scared, just prepared. The next afternoon, her instincts proved right. She was packing up her easel after a slower-than-usual day when she spotted a familiar figure lingering near the end of the street. Kyle. He wasn't alone this time. 3 other men stood with him, all strangers, but all cut from the same cloth, swaggering restless and itching for a fight. Sophia didn't run. She didn't even speed up. She loaded her last canvas into the back of her hatchback, closed the trunk, and turned to face them as they approached. Kyle's expression was different now, less smug, more calculated. "You think you embarrassed me," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "But you've just made things worse for yourself." Sophia tilted her head. "Funny. That's exactly what you did to yourself last week." One of the new guys stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "We can make this go away, sweetheart, if you apologize to our boy here." Sophia's eyes didn't leave Kyle's. Or she said evenly, "You can walk away and nobody gets hurt." They laughed too loud, too forced. The tallest one reached for her arm. Before his fingers even brushed her skin, Sophia pivoted sharply, grabbing his wrist and sending him stumbling past her with a controlled shove. His balance failed him, and he landed hard against the side of a trash bin. The other 2 hesitated. That was all she needed. She stepped into the closer one's space, catching him off guard with a swift knee strike to his midsection. He doubled over, with a groan leaving only Kyle and the third man standing. Kyle's jaw worked as if he wanted to say something, but his feet betrayed him, shuffling backward. "This isn't over," he muttered. Sophia took a single step forward, her voice calm but laced with steel. "For you it is?" The last man, clearly unwilling to test his luck, grabbed Kyle by the elbow and pulled him away. Within seconds, they were gone, melting into the late afternoon crowd. Sophia exhaled slowly, scanning the street. People had stopped to watch again, but this time, there was no pity, only a quiet, collective respect. She picked up her bag, locked her car, and walked away without looking back, her stride steady, her head high. 2 days later, Market Street was busier than usual. The weekend crowd spilled across the plaza, weaving between vendors, musicians, and food stalls. Sophia set up her booth, as always, arranging her canvases in neat rows. Her movements calm and deliberate, but there was an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. People seemed to recognize her before they even reached the stand. Whispers followed her like shadows. "That's her, the artist who took down those guys." You should have seen it. She pretended not to hear, focusing on her work. But then she spotted movement at the far end of the plaza. Kyle again. Only this time he wasn't flanked by friends. His shoulders were hunched, his steps slower, almost reluctant. Sophia didn't tense. She simply watched as he crossed the open space, stopping just short of her booth. The crowd seemed to sense the history between them. Conversations faltered. Eyes shifted toward the pair. Kyle's voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I came to say I was wrong." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You already said that once. Remember?" He shook his head. "No, that was because you made me. This is because I mean it." She studied him for a moment. There were no cameras in his hand, no smirk on his face, just a man who looked smaller than the reputation he'd carried for years. "I hurt you," he continued, glancing briefly at the crowd gathering around them. "And I humiliated you in front of everyone. I thought it was a joke. I thought it made me look strong. But it just made me look like a coward." The words hung in the air, surprising even some of his old friends who stood at the edges of the crowd. Sophia let the silence stretch before she replied. "Humiliation cuts deep, but so does respect. You've got a long way to go if you want to earn it." Kyle nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I know." Then, without another word, he turned and left, his departure quiet and unremarkable compared to the chaos he'd caused before. The crowd shifted its attention back to her, but this time, the energy was different. Less like spectators at a fight, more like witnesses to a turning point. Sophia returned to her booth, selling her art, chatting with customers, and feeling something she hadn't in a long time: peace. By the time the sun dipped low and the plaza began to empty, she packed up her booth with a sense of finality. Kyle's apology hadn't erased what happened, but it had given the story an ending that didn't leave her chained to that moment of shame. As she walked to her car, she passed the spot where it all began, the exact patch of pavement where her dress had been torn. She paused, let the memory surface, and then let it drift away. Replaced by the image of Kyle on his knees, the crowd cheering, and the knowledge that she had reclaimed her power without losing herself in the process. Public humiliation can cut deeper than physical wounds, but dignity is not lost unless we choose to give it away. Sophia's story is a reminder that self-respect often means standing firm, not just for ourselves, but for the message it sends to others. When we confront cruelty with strength and control, we strip bullies of the power they believe they have. Courage, discipline, and self-worth can turn the ugliest moments into defining victories, and in those moments, we teach the world exactly how we expect to be treated.